I was counting out crumpled bills under the harsh buzz of a gas station light when I heard someone crying near the air pump. She sat beside a silver Mercedes, face in her hands, mascara running like rain on glass. I should have kept walking, but something about the way she whispered, "I don't know where else to go," made me stop. That decision changed everything. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the Chevron off Highway 12, my old Honda coughing like it was as tired as I was. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to make everything look colder than it already felt. I stood by the pump, counting out the same wrinkled bills for the third time, hoping somehow the total had changed since the last two. $11.43. That was it. Come on, just work. I muttered under my breath, sliding my debit card into the reader. The little green light blinked, then turned solid. Relief hit me harder than I'd admit to anyone. For tonight at least, we'd have gas. I squeezed the pump handle, listening to the soft hum of fuel filling the tank, already running through tomorrow's schedule in my head. Construction site at 7, grocery store at 9. Maybe 3 hours of sleep between them if I was lucky. Then I heard it. Soft, muffled crying. The kind that slips out when someone's been trying too long to hold it in. I turned my head and saw her, a woman sitting on the curb near the air pump station. Her silver Mercedes gleamed under the lights, spotless and out of place in this rundown part of town. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than my car. But her posture told a different story. Shoulders slumped, hands shaking, face buried in a tissue. People walked past her, eyes forward, pretending not to notice. It's what most folks do when life looks too heavy to touch. But something about her hit me. Maybe the loneliness, maybe the way her quiet sobs echoed how I'd felt too many nights myself. I stood there for a moment, torn between minding my business and doing what felt right. Then I let go of the pump handle and started walking toward her. My work boots scuffed against the concrete, the smell of gasoline and cold air mixing in my nose. "Ma'am," I said softly, stopping a few feet away. "Are you all right?" She looked up, startled, her eyes red and glassy. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rain. For a second, she didn't say anything. Then, in a shaky voice, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't know where else to go." Without really thinking, I sat down beside her on the curb. The concrete was freezing through my jeans, but something about being on her level felt right. She glanced at me, confused but not angry, like she wasn't used to anyone staying. "Sometimes," I said, "we all just need a minute to fall apart." She gave a small, tired laugh, the kind that's half sob, and nodded. "I suppose you're right. My name's Michael," I said, offering a hand. She hesitated before taking it. "Grace. Grace Wellington." Her handshake was delicate, like she was afraid she might break something fragile between us. We sat there in silence for a while. The traffic sounds faded, replaced by the soft hum of the station's lights. Every so often a car pulled in, filled up, and left, and still we sat there like two people who didn't know the night in explanation. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady but hollow. "The funeral was today." I turned my head toward her, not sure what to say. "My son," she continued. "He was 28. An architect. Brilliant. Kind. Everything a mother could hope for." Her voice cracked. "He was working late when part of the building collapsed. They pulled him out, but he never woke up." I felt something inside me twist. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly. I stopped, because no words fit grief like that. She nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. "Everyone kept saying time will heal. But it doesn't. It just stretches the pain out thinner." I didn't know her, didn't know the man she'd lost, but in that moment I understood her loneliness. The kind that sinks into your bones. "I lost someone too," I said after a while. "Not to death, but it feels close sometimes." She looked at me then, really looked. "Your wife?" "Yeah," I said. "She left 2 years ago. Couldn't handle being a mom anymore." Grace studied my face, her expression softening. "Do you have children?" I smiled faintly, pulling my worn wallet from my pocket. Inside was a creased photo, my boy, Tyler, with that gap-toothed grin that made bad days survivable. "He's 8. Wants to be an engineer. Says he's going to build bridges that never fall down." Grace's fingers trembled as she took the photo. "He looks like he has your eyes." For the first time that night, something shifted in her expression. Pain, yes, but also warmth. We stayed like that for a while, Two strangers sitting under gas station lights, trading stories like currency. When she finally handed back the photo, her voice was soft. You remind me of my son. I didn't know then that those words were the start of something that would change everything for both of us. The air was damp that night, heavy with the smell of gasoline and faint rain. I remember how the lights of the Chevron reflected off the puddles like shattered glass. Grace sat beside me, still holding that crumpled tissue, her fingers trembling slightly, as if her body hadn't yet caught up with her grief. For a while, neither of us spoke. There didn't seem to be any words that could fix what was broken inside her. I just sat there, listening to the quiet sound of her breathing, the soft hum of the highway, and the occasional distant rumble of a passing truck. You probably think I'm crazy, she said finally, her voice hoarse. Sitting here in a parking lot, crying like a fool. I shook my head. No, ma'am. I think you're human. She let out a faint, bitter laugh. It doesn't feel very human. It feels like the world just stopped. I nodded, staring out at the road. Sometimes it does. Feels like the whole world keeps moving except you. When she looked at me again, her eyes had softened a little, like my words had found some small place to rest. You said your son wants to build bridges? Yeah, I said, managing a faint smile. Tyler's got this thing for figuring out how things hold together. Always asking why one thing falls and another doesn't. The kid takes apart every radio, clock, and toaster he can get his hands on. Drives me nuts, but I can't bring myself to stop him. Grace smiled weakly. Nathan used to do the same thing. My late husband would come home from work to find the television in pieces on the floor. Nathan would say, I just want to understand how it works, Mom. He became an architect for that reason, to understand structure. Her expression faltered, pain flickering across her face like a shadow. He was designing a hospital building when it happened. The irony, the thing he believed in most, structure, was what killed him. I felt a lump rise in my throat. That's a cruel kind of irony, I said quietly. She nodded, her voice trembling. He wanted to create buildings that would stand for 1,000 years. He said he wanted to make things that wouldn't crumble, unlike people. Her words hung in the air, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of them. We were both people who'd lost something we couldn't rebuild. You know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tyler's been talking about bridges for months now. Says he wants to build ones that never fall. Maybe that's how he tries to fix the world in his head, make something that can't break. Grace looked at me, her eyes searching. You must be proud of him. I am, I said. More than I can say. But it's hard sometimes. 2 jobs, rent past due, electric bill on the edge. There are nights I come home too tired to even ask how his day went. I keep thinking he deserves more than what I can give him. She frowned, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. 2 jobs. I nodded. Construction during the day. Stock shelves at a grocery store at night. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, watches Tyler when I'm not home. She's a saint, but it's not the same as having his dad around. Grace dabbed her eyes again, then looked at my hands, rough, scarred, calloused from years of work. You're exhausted, she said softly. I chuckled without humor. That's one way to put it. For the first time, she seemed to see me not as a stranger, but as someone fighting his own quiet war. Maybe that's what grief does. It strips away the walls between people. You know, she said after a moment, you remind me of my son in another way. He believed that kindness was the only thing that really made sense in the world. Every Saturday, he volunteered at the children's hospital, reading to kids who were sick. He said the smallest gestures could save a life. I felt my throat tighten. He sounds like someone worth remembering. He was, she whispered. But tonight, I couldn't see that anymore. I couldn't see anything but loss. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that came to mind. You saw enough to stop here. That counts for something. She turned her head toward me, a tear slipping down her cheek. And you saw enough to sit down. The night grew quieter. A light drizzle began to fall, tapping softly against the pavement. I could see her shoulders begin to ease, the tension in her breathing easing just a little. After a long silence, she reached into her purse and pulled out a white card. There's someone I want you to call tomorrow, she said, handing it to me. The card was embossed with gold lettering, Robert Patterson, attorney at law. Ma'am, I appreciate it, I said, frowning, but I'm not sure I need a lawyer. Her smile returned, small but sincere this time. Trust me, Michael. Just call him. Ask about the Wellington Foundation scholarship. Promise me you will. Her tone left no room for argument, so I nodded. I promise. She tucked the tissue back into her purse and stood up, brushing off her coat. Thank you, Michael, she said quietly, for seeing me. And then she was gone, leaving me under the buzzing lights, the card still warm in my hand. I didn't know it yet, but that short walk from the gas pump to the curb was the single most important step I'd ever taken in my life. The rain came harder as I drove home that night, my wipers squeaking across the windshield in tired rhythm. Grace's face kept flashing in my mind. The streaked makeup, the cracked voice, the way she'd said, "Thank you," like it was the first time she'd meant it in months. The lawyer's card sat on the passenger seat, catching glints of light from the street lamps. I didn't know what the Wellington Foundation was, and honestly, I didn't expect much to come from it. Still, there was something about the look in her eyes when she made me promise that I couldn't shake. When I got home, it was almost 1 in the morning. Mrs. Patterson had dozed off in the recliner, knitting needles still in her lap, while Tyler slept on the couch with his schoolbooks scattered around him. I slipped her a 20 for watching him, though she always tried to refuse, then carried Tyler to his bed. He stirred when I tucked him in, mumbling, "Did you fix the car, Dad?" "Not yet, buddy," I whispered, "but we'll get there." The next morning, I stood by the kitchen counter, drinking weak coffee from a chipped mug, staring at that business card again. My first instinct was to toss it. Rich people make all kinds of promises they never follow through on. But something about Grace's voice stuck with me. Not just her sadness, but the sincerity beneath it. She didn't seem like someone who handed out cards just to feel generous. I slipped it into my wallet before heading out the door. Work that day felt heavier than usual. Every sound at the construction site seemed sharper. The clang of steel, the groan of machinery, the rough laughter of men trying to forget their own problems. I pushed through it, as always. But when the shift ended and I sat in my car, sweat still drying on my back, I took out the card again. Robert Patterson, attorney at law. It was late afternoon when I finally dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered, "Patterson Law Offices." Hi. My name's Michael Harrison. I was told to call about a scholarship." There was a short pause. Yes, Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Wellington mentioned you. Could you come by the office tomorrow morning? She asked that I meet with you personally." I hesitated. "Sure, I guess I can make that work." When I hung up, I just sat there for a while, trying to figure out what any of it meant. I didn't know if this was real or some kind of misunderstanding, but something told me to show up. That night, Tyler was at the kitchen table working on a science project, a bridge made of popsicle sticks and glue. He looked up when I came in, his eyes bright. "Dad, look. It can hold 20 pounds. He placed a small dumbbell on top, and sure enough, the bridge didn't budge. His grin was pure pride, the kind of thing that makes every sleepless night worth it. "Wow," I said, smiling. "That's some engineering right there." He shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Miss Rodriguez says if I keep working hard, I could go to one of those special schools, the ones with real labs." I felt that familiar tug in my chest, pride and pain mixed together. "You'll get there, kiddo." Somehow. Later, after he'd gone to bed, I sat by the window, the glow from the streetlights spilling across the table. The card was still in front of me, its letters crisp and expensive looking. I thought about Grace again, how broken she'd looked, how she'd somehow found the strength to care about a stranger's kid. Maybe, I thought, she just needed to believe that something good could still come out of her son's death. And maybe, without realizing it, I needed to believe that too. The next morning came fast. I shaved, put on the cleanest shirt I owned, and dropped Tyler at school early. My stomach knotted the whole drive across town. The law office was in a tall glass building, one of those places that smelled like polished wood and quiet money. A receptionist smiled when I walked in. "Mr. Harrison? Mr. Patterson will see you now." Inside, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes stood to greet me. His suit probably cost more than my car, but his smile was genuine. "Mr. Harrison," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "It's good to meet you. Mrs. Wellington spoke very highly of you." I blinked. "She did." He nodded and gestured for me to sit. "She told me you stopped to help her when she needed it most. That says a lot about your character. And as it happens, she'd like to return the favor." I stared at him, completely lost. "What do you mean?" He reached for a folder on his desk and slid it toward me. The Wellington Foundation was created to support promising young minds, especially those facing financial hardship. After meeting you, Mrs. Wellington believes your son Tyler might be exactly what the program was designed for. I opened the folder, and for a moment the words blurred together. Full scholarship, education expenses covered, enrichment programs included. This can't be real, I said quietly. I met her for an hour. The lawyer smiled gently. Sometimes an hour is enough to change everything. And sitting there, clutching those papers, I realized he might be right. Robert Ellis closed the folder and folded his hands like he'd just slid a new road map across the desk. Take the evening, he said. Sleep on it. I'll come by your apartment in the morning and we'll go over everything with a clear head. I nodded because my mouth wasn't working right. Outside his office windows, glass towers threw sunlight across the city like bright water. I kept thinking how Dylan Whitman used to sketch buildings meant to stand forever, and how my kids spend Saturdays making truss bridges out of popsicle sticks. Funny how dreams from two different lives can line up like girders. Back in the car, I called Mason's school and left a message that I'd pick him up right after last bell. On the drive home, all I could hear was Laura's voice from the gas station, raw and frayed, but steady enough to say, "Promise me you'll call." I had called, and now the future was sitting in a folder on my passenger seat, heavy as wet lumber. I pulled up to our building a few minutes before dismissal and waited, engine ticking. The familiar ache set in, the one that shows up when you want more for your kid than your hands can buy. When Mason came out, backpack bouncing and hair a mess, he hopped into the front seat like he owned it. "Hey, Dad, guess what? Miss Rodriguez showed us a video on suspension bridges, and I think I figured out why my deck keeps sagging on the model." He launched into an explanation with all the excitement a person can fit into breath. I let him go, nodding along, soaking it in. When he finally paused, I said, "You know how you're always talking about building a bridge that never falls? Yeah, there are people who want to help you get the tools to do that for real. Good schools, labs, summer programs, the whole deal." His eyes went wide. "For me? For you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A woman named Laura Whitman heard about you. Her son, Dylan, he designed buildings. She thinks you might be cut from the same cloth." We drove the rest of the way in that warm, buzzy silence that happens when hope starts to feel like a real thing you can touch. At home, I spread the papers across our coffee table like blueprints. Mason ran a finger over the typed lines, tuition covered, enrichment programs, mentorships, reading like he was tracing a river on a map. He didn't say much, just kept nodding the way a kid nods when the world suddenly opens a new door and he's trying not to sprint through it. "Dad," he said finally, "do you think I could build a bridge big enough to cross the Mississippi?" "I think you could build one that crosses anything in front of you," I said. And I meant it. After dinner, eggs and toast, the budget special, I washed dishes while Mason tinkered with his model on the counter. Every so often he'd test a span, wince, shim it, then test again. I watched his small hands work with the patience of someone who believes failure is just a measurement you take before success. I thought about Dylan in a hard hat, standing in front of a half-built frame, and Laura reading to kids in a hospital with her son on Saturdays. Different scenes, same heartbeat. When Mason went to bed, I sat by the window with the city noise breathing through the screen and took out my wallet. The old photo of him, gap-toothed and proud, had a crease down the middle from all the times I'd folded it away to keep it safe. I turned it over and wrote a date on the back. It felt like the kind of day you mark. I picked up my phone twice to call Laura and put it down both times. What do you even say to someone who shows up in your life like a second chance? "Thank you" sounded small. "We won't waste it" sounded like a promise you make with your actions, not your mouth. Before I turned in, I called Mrs. Patterson next door to ask if she could swing by in the morning, just in case I needed a second pair of eyes when Robert Ellis came through with all the official talk. She said she wouldn't miss it for the world and then told me to stop apologizing for asking. I lay awake longer than I wanted, listening to the old radiator click like a slow metronome. All the usual worries tried to crowd in: rent, overtime, busted alternator, uniform shirt with a frayed collar, but they didn't land the way they usually did. The weight shifted. It didn't vanish, but it moved to somewhere I could carry. Sometime after midnight, I pictured that gas station again. The cold curb, Laura's shaking hands, my boots scuffing concrete. A 5-minute conversation between two people who could have kept walking and didn't. Bridges don't just span distance. They connect places that wouldn't meet otherwise. Maybe what Laura and I built that night wasn't made of steel, but it held. Morning would come quick. Papers would be signed or not. Life would tilt or stay put. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for something to break. I was getting ready to step onto something sturdy. Robert Ellis would knock at 7:30. We'd see what the future looked like, blueprint by blueprint. The next morning started like any other. Coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, an old radio muttering about weather, and Mason asking if I could sign his math worksheet before work. I was halfway through lacing my boots when a knock came at the door. Free sharp wraps. Not the kind neighbors make. Mason peeked through the blinds. "Dad," he whispered, "there's a man outside in a really nice suit." I frowned, checking the clock. 7:30. Probably another salesman. "No," Mason said. "He's got papers. And a briefcase." When I opened the door, the man smiled like he'd been expecting me. "Mr. Carter? I'm Robert Ellis." His handshake was firm, his cologne subtle, his shoes the kind that never meet dust. "I believe you met Mrs. Laura Whitman 2 nights ago." I blinked. "You're the lawyer." "That's correct," he said, stepping inside. "I'm here on behalf of the Whitman Foundation. May I?" I gestured toward our couch, suddenly aware of the peeling wallpaper and the stack of bills on the coffee table. "Sure. Sorry for the mess." He sat carefully, setting his briefcase down like it held glass. Mason hovered by the armrest, half hiding, half curious. "Mrs. Whitman asked me to deliver a few things personally," Ellis said. His tone was calm, practiced, the voice of someone who delivers news that usually changes lives. "She told me about your son's interest in engineering, about the hardships you've faced. She was deeply moved by your conversation at the gas station." I rubbed the back of my neck. "Look, I didn't do anything special. She just looked like she needed someone to talk to." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's the most special thing of all." Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a blue ribbon. "This," he said, placing it on the table, "is an offer from the Whitman Foundation. A full academic scholarship for Mason, extending through high school and college, provided he maintains his academic performance. It includes tuition, supplies, enrichment programs, and travel for educational purposes." For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator. "A scholarship?" "Yes," Ellis replied. "Mrs. Whitman established the foundation in memory of her late son, Dylan. She believes Mason embodies the same passion Dylan had for design and engineering." I picked up the envelope, half expecting it to dissolve. Inside were official documents stamped with seals, lined with numbers I could hardly comprehend. Tuition, housing, stipends, words that belonged to another world. "This can't be real," I said, my voice barely more than air. "I met her once. For an hour." Ellis leaned forward. "She told me something this morning, Mr. Carter. When you found her that night, she wasn't just grieving. She was hopeless. She'd lost her son, her faith in people, her will to keep living. She was sitting in that car, deciding whether to go on." The room spun. "You mean she?" He nodded gently. "She said she was ready to end her life. Then you appeared, a man with tired eyes and calloused hands, who still found enough kindness to sit beside a stranger and listen. You reminded her that the world still has good people in it. You saved her, Mr. Carter." I stared at the floor. Mason looked from Ellis to me, confused but wide-eyed. I couldn't even speak. Ellis continued quietly. "She wants to return that kindness. Not with charity, but with opportunity. And she's not finished." He reached back into the briefcase, pulling out another folder. This one thicker, the edges embossed. "Mrs. Whitman has purchased a home for you and your son. 4 bedrooms, a workshop, large backyard. In the Riverside district." My mouth went dry. "A house. In your name, free and clear. No mortgage, no debt. Property taxes prepaid for 5 years. There's also a small trust to ease your working hours so you can spend more time with Mason." I sank into the chair like my legs gave out. Mason's small hand slipped into mine. Ellis's voice softened. "She asked me to tell you one more thing. Her son, Dylan, always said that good structures are built on strong foundations. She believes your compassion is that foundation. And she wanted you to know. He would have liked you both very much." Silence filled the room. I think even the clock stopped ticking. When Ellis stood to leave, I found my voice again. "Can we thank her? I mean properly?" "She'll reach out soon," he said with a knowing smile. "She wants to meet Mason. She believes his bridge designs are worth seeing." He handed me one last envelope. The keys will be delivered this weekend. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. Sometimes good people get what they deserve. When the door closed behind him, I just sat there. Mason stared at the pile of papers like they were magic spells. Dad, he said finally, his voice small and shaky. Did we just get a house? I looked at him, at the wonder in his eyes, and laughed through tears I didn't realize were there. Yeah, buddy, I said. I think we just did. I must have read those papers a dozen times, like the words might change if I blinked too long. Mason kept circling the table, touching each page as if it were a switch he could flip to keep the moment from disappearing. The apartment felt too small for the size of what just happened. Even the walls seemed to lean in to listen. I called work first. My foreman answered on the second ring, voice already annoyed. Jack, you late again? No, sir. Something came up. Family. A long pause, then a grunt that meant I'd better not make a habit of it. I promised to swing by later in the week and made a note in my head I'd probably never forget. I don't have to kill myself with 2 jobs anymore. Not if this holds. I set a pot of coffee and stared at the slow drip like it was telling time for a different life. Mason slid into the chair across from me, elbows on the table, chin in his hands. Dad, if Mrs. Whitman was that sad, do you think she's okay now? I swallowed. I think she's trying to be. And I think we're part of that. How? By building something she can believe in. He sat up straighter at that. Like a bridge. Exactly like a bridge. Word travels fast in buildings like ours. By noon, Mrs. Patterson knocked with a casserole and wet eyes. She didn't even pretend to be casual. I heard a lawyer came by, Jack. Is it true? I nodded, and she hugged me with the strength of a woman who's carried other people's kids through rough water. She asked if Mason could show her his bridge project again, and he gave her the full tour. Compression, tension, trusses. She kept saying, would you look at that? Like it was the first time she'd seen Hope wear sneakers. By late afternoon, neighbors I barely knew found excuses to stop in. A guy from the night shift at the grocery store came with a bag of oranges. One of the cashiers from down the block brought paper plates I didn't ask for. People wanted to stand near the good news, like maybe it would rub off. And I didn't mind. A day like that belongs to more than just the people in it. When the door finally closed and the apartment went quiet again, the weight of what Robert Ellis had said settled in. Laura hadn't just been grieving. She'd been ready to quit the whole fight. And I, standing there with $11.43 in gas and calluses that never quite heal, had sat down on a curb and told a stranger she wasn't invisible. I pulled out a notebook and tried to write her a thank you note. The first line came easy, Dear Mrs. Whitman, and then I stalled. Thank you felt small. We won't waste it felt important, but thin on its own. I scratched it out and started again. Laura, you didn't save us with money. You gave my boy a horizon. If you ever doubt the good left in this world, come by and watch him build. You'll hear it in the way he talks about load paths and river spans. You'll see it in his hands. I stopped there, tore the page out, folded it, and tucked it into the front of the scholarship folder. I'd give it to her when I could say it without my voice breaking. That evening, Mason and I made a small dinner. He ate fast, then disappeared to the counter to modify his bridge. I watched him work, measure, test, adjust, the calm of someone who believes that problems have solutions if you stay with them long enough. Every so often he'd ask, what if I change the angle here? Or do you think I need another cross brace? And I'd say, show me, because that's how faith sounds in our house. Not fancy, just present. Around 9, he set the dumbbell on his bridge again and stepped back. The span didn't sag. He didn't cheer, didn't fist pump. He just nodded once and smiled in that quiet way of his, like he and the world had made a deal and both sides kept it. Looks solid, I said. Yeah, he breathed. Feels different tonight. Before bed, we stood by the window and looked out at the parking lot lights making halos on the cracked asphalt. Think the new place has trees? He asked. Paper says a big backyard, I said. Maybe we'll hang a tire swing from something old enough to remember better times. He grinned. And a workshop? Workshop, I said, tapping the folder. It's in writing. When I tucked him in, he asked, do you think Dylan can see us? I sat on the edge of the bed. I think if what we do honors him, that counts. I think when you build your first real bridge, we'll write his name on the first page of the plans. Mason nodded like he was filing that under promises we keep. The apartment felt different after he fell asleep. Lighter, but not empty. I cleaned the kitchen, stacked the scholarship pages in order, and laid the house documents on top like a roof. Then I took out the photo I keep in my wallet. Mason gap-toothed, cheeks dirty from a day he swore he wasn't playing in the lot, and I pressed it flat against the table. I'd folded and unfolded it so many times the crease had turned into a scar. Okay, I said to no one, or maybe to the night itself. We'll build this right. I clicked off lights, checked the door, and paused at the quiet. 2 days ago, I was measuring my life in shifts and overdue bills. Tonight, I was measuring it in foundations and spans. Same hands, new plans. Tomorrow we'd see the house on Riverside. We'd step through a door someone opened because a stranger decided to sit down and ask a simple question that can pull a person back from the edge. Are you okay? I wasn't sure what I'd say to Laura when I saw her, but I knew what I'd show her. A boy bent over a workbench, a father with hours to give, and a life that finally felt built to hold. 2 days later, Mason and I stood on the sidewalk staring at a house that didn't seem real. It was the kind of place we used to drive past just to look at, a 2-story colonial with a wide porch and forest green shutters, sitting back from the street like it had been waiting for us to show up. Sunlight caught on the windows, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was looking at someone else's life. Robert Ellis met us at the gate, his tie a little looser than last time. "Welcome home," he said, handing me a key ring with a small brass tag that read Riverside. Mason practically bounced in place beside me. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and polished wood. The walls were warm cream, the floors oak. Each step echoed like a reminder that this was ours. Mason darted ahead, opening doors, peeking into rooms. "Dad, there's a bathroom just for me. And another one upstairs. And look, there's stairs." I laughed, following slower, taking it all in. The kitchen had more counter space than our whole old apartment. A real dining room opened onto the backyard, where an enormous oak tree stretched its arms across the sky. Beyond the garage, a small building caught Mason's eye. "Is that the workshop?" Robert smiled. "It is." Mrs. Whitman wanted to be sure it had everything an engineer in training might need. We crossed the yard, and when I opened the workshop door, I swear Mason forgot how to breathe. A sturdy workbench lined one wall, tool drawers beneath it, and a brand new computer sat on the desk, loaded with design software. A note taped to the monitor read in neat handwriting, "Build something that stands. LW." Mason ran his fingers over the keys as though they were sacred. "Dad, this is crazy. She actually did all this for us." "Looks that way," I said, blinking hard. Robert left soon after, promising to send over the remaining documents once everything was recorded. Mason and I walked through every room again, finding details we'd missed: the fireplace, the window seat, the faint scent of lavender that lingered upstairs. When we reached the last room, the master bedroom, I stopped in the doorway. The space was bright and simple. No luxury, just peace. I hadn't realized how much noise I'd been carrying until that moment. That evening, we unpacked what little we had. Our belongings filled barely half the space, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a clean slate. Mason insisted we eat dinner on the porch, sitting cross-legged on the wooden steps, sandwiches in hand. Fireflies winked across the yard. "You think she'll come visit?" he asked between bites. "I think she will," I said. "People don't give like that just to disappear." He nodded, satisfied. "I want to show her my new bridge idea. I'm going to build one that could hold a truck." "You'll need a strong foundation," I said. "Already thought of that." When the sun dipped low, he curled against me, the kind of quiet that says we made it wrapping around us. I remembered the night at the gas station, the flickering light, Laura's broken voice, and how different she had looked from the woman whose note now sat in our workshop. Later, as I tucked Mason into bed, he looked around the huge room like he was memorizing it. "Do we have to give it back?" I smiled. "No, buddy. It's ours." He grinned, eyes half closed. "Then I'm going to build something for her. For Mrs. Whitman. So she always knows she did the right thing." I brushed his hair back. "That sounds like a plan." After he fell asleep, I wandered back to the porch. The night was quiet except for crickets and the distant sound of a train passing the river bend. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand how a single act of kindness had unfolded into this. From where I sat, the house glowed softly through the windows, like it already knew it was sheltering something worth keeping. And somewhere out there, I hoped Laura was doing the same, sitting by her window, maybe smiling, maybe still healing, but knowing that a man and his son were building again because she chose to keep living. Tomorrow, I'd call her. There were things words couldn't fix, but gratitude might bridge the rest. Laura came for dinner 2 weeks later. I must have cleaned the kitchen 3 times that day, not because the place needed it, but because I didn't know how to prepare for someone who'd changed our lives with one decision. Mason drew a welcome sign with "Thank you, Mrs. Whitman," written in bold blue marker, and taped it to the front door crookedly. I didn't fix it. It felt right that way, imperfect, but honest. When her car pulled into the driveway, Mason spotted it first. "She's here," he shouted, bolting toward the porch before I could even dry my hands. I followed him out, nerves tight but hopeful. Laura stepped out of a sleek black sedan, wearing a simple blue dress that made her look younger than I remembered. Her smile was small but real, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Mrs. Whitman," I said, stepping forward, unsure if I should offer a handshake or a hug. She decided for me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders with surprising strength. "Call me Laura," she said quietly. Inside, the evening moved gently, like it knew not to rush. Mason showed her the workshop first, his sacred space. He explained his bridge designs, how he'd been testing tension and load, how he was building one inspired by the Mississippi River span he'd seen in a book. She listened intently, asking real questions, nodding with pride. "Nathan would have loved this," she said softly, catching herself before correcting the name. "I mean, Dylan." Her voice cracked just slightly, but she steadied it. He always admired people who built things that lasted. Dinner was simple: baked chicken, mashed potatoes, a salad that Mason insisted on mixing himself. We sat at the dining table under the soft glow of a pendant lamp, and for a while, the conversation circled safely around small things: weather, neighborhood, Mason's school. But as the plates emptied, the air grew still. Laura folded her napkin slowly. "Jack," she said, looking up, "there's something I need to tell you." I nodded, sensing what was coming but letting her find her own pace. That night at the gas station, after Dylan's funeral, I wasn't just sad. I was finished. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. I'd lost everything that gave life meaning. I sat there in my car for an hour, thinking about how quiet it would be afterward. And then I heard someone ask if I was all right. I didn't speak. The clock ticked in the background. She continued, "You didn't know who I was, didn't know me a thing, but you sat down anyway. You didn't talk about yourself or try to fix me. You just reminded me that kindness still exists. You pulled me back." I felt my chest tighten. I just did what anyone decent would do. She shook her head gently. "No, Jack. Most people don't stop anymore. But you did. And because of that, I got to wake up the next morning and decide to live, not just survive. That's what you gave me." Mason had been listening quietly. He reached across the table, his small hand brushing hers. "It's okay, Mrs. Whitman," he said. "You helped us too. My dad doesn't look tired all the time now." That made her laugh, the first real, easy laugh I'd heard from her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a framed photograph. "This was Dylan on his first job site," she said. In the picture, a young man stood in a hard hat and safety vest, smiling in front of a half-built structure. "I'd like you to have it, Mason." He believed every great design starts with a dream and someone brave enough to chase it. Mason accepted it carefully, like it was made of glass. "Thank you. I'll keep it in the workshop." When she stood to leave, we walked her to the porch. The evening air was cool, and the fireflies were out again, blinking in the dark. She turned to me and said, "This isn't charity, Jack. It's healing for all of us. I needed to give meaning to Dylan's life. You and Mason gave me a reason to believe that meaning can grow again." She looked out over the yard, her eyes catching the glow from Mason's workshop window. "He's going to build something extraordinary one day," she said softly. "And when he does, I hope he remembers that kindness was the first brick." "I'll make sure he does," I said. As her car disappeared down the street, I stood there for a long time, the sound of crickets filling the quiet. Mason came up beside me, clutching the photo. "Dad," he said, "when I build my first bridge, can I name it after her son?" I smiled, looking down at him. "I think that's the best name it could have." He grinned. "Then I'll make sure it never falls." Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I walked out to the workshop. The note Laura had left, "Build something that stands," was still taped to the computer. I looked around at the space, at Mason's half-finished projects, and thought about all the invisible bridges people build without realizing it. A word, a gesture, a seat on a curb shared between two strangers. The world's full of people walking past each other, too busy to stop. But every once in a while, somebody does. And when they do, it changes everything. That night, under the quiet hum of the porch light, I realized something simple and certain. We're all just trying to build something that holds, something that doesn't fall when the world shakes. And sometimes, all it takes to start is asking a stranger, "Are you okay?"